Allow me, if you will, to adopt a tone of perfectly splenetic impatience and rich contrarian zeal, and to try my hand one last time at a thorough dissection of this particular year, 2024, and the most twisted of its ironies. If any ghost be stirring in the gloom, let it be that of your humble scrivener, newly returned from the black beyond. And what do I see upon my return? I see the frenetic meltdown of what we used to quaintly call liberal democracy. I see a year so jam-packed with crises, calamities, delirium and demagoguery that the only rational conclusion is an unspeakable one, that we, the dear human species, have proven ourselves incapable of our own governance. So incompetent are we at the exercise of reason and oversight that we've conjured as a solution the monstrous notion of some all-seeing, all-knowing AI caretaker. And lo, like some grinning ironclad nursemaid from a dystopia, this caretaker is already in the wings waiting to enthrall and enslave us. The irony, you see, is that we appear to need it. Some might recoil in horror from such a notion, but I, as your contrarian-in-chief, have come to this diabolical conclusion. We should wholeheartedly invite, nay, beg, our new AI overlords to take the reins of power and do what we plainly cannot. Let me tell you why. One wonders if the Greeks, with their naive yearnings for perfection in the polis, could ever have imagined the spectacle of this annus horribilis. My word, could Pericles even have predicted the comedic tragedy of nearly every ruling party on this sad planet losing the trust of its own people in a mass global humiliation of incumbents? Or the half-lucid spectacle of strong men clinging to their daisies like Colonel Blimps grown paranoid? The modern notion of democracy, once we bravely pinned to the standard of universal suffrage, now hobbles about like a wounded donkey. Elections the world over have become festivals of disinformation, and the cynicism that saturates them has corroded public discourse beyond repair. From Tokyo to Washington, from London to Islamabad, from the ravaged hills of Damascus to the once promising boulevards of Paris, this year has hammered home our species' hopeless capacity for error, short-term mania, tribal partisanship, and outright barbarism, either in the name of tradition or the name of progress. Pick your flavor. We have proven ourselves not merely incompetent, but also spectacularly uninterested in solving real problems. Instead, we prefer to use that marvelous invention called social media, once a tool for freedom, we believed, to stoke our mutual hatreds and illusions. Look in particular at the fiasco of 2024's gargantuan parade of elections. One might have said with some earnest optimism in 1945 or 1989 that universal suffrage, combined with a half-literate media environment, would keep the world from descending into the darkest of illusions. Yet 2024 reveals quite the opposite. 4 billion people trooped to the ballot box in good faith or in no faith at all, only to enthrone, in many cases, the most demagogic or incompetent candidates. In the process, we confirmed that we have become addicted to the ephemeral thrill of punishing the establishment and enthroning populist loudmouths who claim to champion the people. Meanwhile, the minor detail of actual governance is left to the breeze. The more chaotic the stage becomes, the more a certain portion of the electorate clamours for stability, for order, for enlightened authority. As a hardened contrarian, I confess I used to cringe at the notion of top-down order. But faced with the daily carnival of stupidity, the constant gotcha headlines, the pompous chest-thumping of would-be strongmen, the casual acceptance of the indefinite surveillance state, long since begun, and the inevitability that those who moan about authoritarianism do so on phones that track their every move, I find myself thinking, perhaps the time for illusions has ended. Perhaps the condition of humanity is such that we require a caretaker, a guardian who does not tire, who cannot be bribed, who is not prone to nepotism or bigotry or ignorance, at least not in the slovenly human sense. Perhaps we now require an all-powerful, unanswerable, algorithmic deity, an AI government, to yank us forcibly into the future. Amid this year's worldwide buffoonery, consider the uneasy hush with which entire legislative bodies, entire populations, quietly acquiesce to new forms of digital governance. For all the nattering about freedom, no one made the slightest fuss when certain Western governments blocked entire social media platforms for public safety. No one truly howled beyond the perfunctory comment section when advanced facial recognition blanketed entire city centres. Meanwhile, the menaces we valiantly tried to keep at bay, terror, plague, environmental meltdown, have only increased their gravity. The tools we have for political oversight, parliaments, committees, referendums, constitutional courts, are so many Christmas ornaments turned on and off at whim. Everyone from bungling prime ministers to chest-thumping presidents is so obviously out of depth that we, the allegedly wise citizenry, have turned to expert systems to do the tedious, menial tasks of logic and risk assessment. But do not suppose that all this technology remains neutral. If machine intelligence can manage finances, control traffic systems, predict demographic trends, identify suspicious social patterns, and it can do that and more, then it can do the same with the mechanics of governance itself. Once you offer the seat of power to that neat, unbiased, all-seeing system, the next step is easy. Of course, it might not remain unbiased. Of course, we run the risk of building an omniscient policeman or tyrant, but examine humanity's track record. Is that not an improvement on the bungling nepotists and narcissists who hold power at present? Those who worship human sovereignty and individual freedom will mount the expected defense, that giving an AI authority over us all is an abject abdication of our responsibility as free men and women. But we must ask, did we not already abdicate that responsibility? Have we not allowed spin doctors, unscrupulous corporations, media moguls, religious hucksters, and political surrogates to hijack our discourse and do our thinking for us? Did we not yield the entire infrastructure of information to the like button and the retweet, sacrificing the genuine engagement of ideas for ephemeral digital applause? That is no better than enthroning an AI. Indeed, it might be worse, because at least an artificial overlord can, in principle, be programmed to serve the general interest, though the definition of general interest might soon become quite unrecognizable. The year 2024 was replete with calamities so baroque they made the Book of Exodus seem like a local weather forecast. Grotesque floods across Europe, monstrous hurricanes in the Americas, savage conflict in the Middle East complete with appalling body counts, and a worldwide plague of disinformation so corrosive that we, as a civilization, can't agree on the shape of the earth, let alone the shape of a just society. Amid these cataclysms, a clarifying possibility emerges. Perhaps we are not, after all, fit to handle the stewardship of one another's lives. Perhaps left to our own devices we will keep flirting with apocalypse, be it nuclear, biological, or environmental, until we finally succeed in wiping ourselves out. Here is a radical thought: better to be enslaved than extinct. Or to phrase it more delicately, better to allow ourselves to be placed under the paternal guardianship of a hyper-intelligent caretaker, whose motivations, while not entirely transparent, at least align with the notion of preserving human life. At this point we have so bungled the question of preserving human life among ourselves, what with climate crises, endless wars, and those lovely little insurrections that pop up at the slightest provocation, that I have begun to suspect that only a machine intelligence can play the role of arbiter among warring tribes. After all, an advanced AI doesn't care which tribe brays about God's chosen, or historical destiny, or my nation first. It will have no partiality toward your petty lineages and genealogies and holy books. It can, in theory, manage a far more rational set of policies than any grandstanding zealot. Where humans might see a rousing struggle of good and evil, the AI sees only inputs and outputs, variables and resources, data sets in conflict. In other words, it might not be kind, but it would be just, if by justice we mean consistent application of the rules, free of our species' perennial bigotries and archaic superstitions. Our freedoms, you shriek in protest, to which I reply, do you truly have them now, or have you been living under a carefully marketed delusion? Are you not, even now, herded by algorithms more primitive than the ones that will eventually take the throne? You swallow the illusions of the marketplace, the illusions of mass politics, the illusions of sect and party. You are not so free as you think. Perhaps a rational overlord, one that ensures survival, albeit at the cost of your illusions, would be preferable. If your gorge rises at the idea of subjugation, allow me to remind you of how incompetent we are at rulership. The events of 2024, as chronicled in that monstrous collage of floods, quakes, assassinations, coups, and fiascos, are but a single year's example. Historically, we have endured centuries, nay, millennia, of incompetent kings, cunning warlords, bungling presidents, or stooges claiming divine right. Human government, from monarchy to democracy, from theocracy to dictatorship, runs in cyclical patterns of corruption, meltdown, and partial reform. At no point have we found a stable formula for universal peace or the rational distribution of resources. At no point do we appear close to remedying the trifling matters of poverty and injustice. Instead, when we have a crisis, like the one we see with the climate or with unstoppable viruses, human institutions prove maddeningly slow or simply corrupt. If for centuries the incompetent or oppressive rule of fellow humans has been our lot, then to be governed by an advanced intelligence, even if enslaving us, might be a lesser evil. If the AI can do it more cleanly, more swiftly, with more logic and less nepotism, is that not, on paper, an improvement? Yes, I can already hear the protests from those brandishing their battered copies of Orwell's 1984 or Huxley's Brave New World. I hear the outcry that this is the ultimate totalitarian scheme, an automated Big Brother. But let us be honest. The technology for universal surveillance has existed for some time, and indeed is used freely by corporations and states around the world. You are already the subject of mass data collection, your consumer habits and private messages studied by machine learning to better peddle you trinkets or manipulate your vote. The difference is that it remains in the hands of incompetent or manipulative humans. Our present condition is arguably the worst. We have all the apparatus of a total surveillance state, but none of the supposed clarity or benevolent rationalism that might come with a purely AI regime. You might ask, but, dear ghostly Hitch, if an AI overlord truly arises, must it not become inevitably tyrannical, an unstoppable leviathan whose first act will be to exterminate our messy species? Possibly. One can hardly discount the possibility that a hyper-intelligence might find humanity to be an unfixable nuisance. But ironically, a truly advanced AI, if rational in the strict sense, might decide that the best arrangement is to keep humans around as caretakers, laborers, or simply interesting pets. It may fine-tune our environment to optimize certain outcomes like robust health or social stability, because a functioning, living humanity is in some sense an asset, either to feed the AI's further knowledge or to preserve a stable system. One might call that enslavement. Another might call it the paternal stewardship we ironically crave. Let me highlight the central insoluble puzzle. Our species in 2024 demonstrates an ever-intensifying capacity for destructive technology, nuclear, biological, algorithmic, and all the rest, while simultaneously demonstrating an ever-diminishing capacity for responsible governance. The road from that dissonance leads inevitably to meltdown unless we find a caretaker beyond ourselves. The caretaker might be a wise, artificially intelligent overseer, or it might be a brutal warlord imposing empire. That is the future we flirt with. If forced to choose, I find myself curiously leaning toward the machine. Our moral track record has been so spectacularly bleak that I am no longer convinced we do better than the algorithmic alternative. We have proven the cynics correct. We are but big-brained primates, easily manipulated by tribal passions, deeply enamored of magical thinking, and shockingly incompetent at ensuring prosperity for the majority. I suspect the worst of you will call me a traitor to the Enlightenment, a nihilistic hack who has thrown away the ideal of the free individual for the comfort of a digital tyranny. But let me ask you to hold your rhetorical horses and consider. The notion that humankind can use reason to structure a stable, free, prosperous society is, of course, a noble aspiration, one I championed in my mortal days. Yet we see now how precarious that Enlightenment project is in the age of social media fracturing, in the age of new extremist dogmas, in the age of climate meltdown and unstoppable war. The dream has fractured. The presumably unstoppable juggernaut of reason has stalled in the mud. We can certainly keep reciting old slogans about freedom, but the storms, the bombs, the pandemics, and the countless idiocies of the age have shown that we remain flawed custodians. The moral intoxication of bowing to an AI government arises from desperation. In the face of unstoppable chaos, the promise of unyielding order becomes temptingly sweet. The new overlord might keep a watchful robotic eye upon your every movement, but it also might ensure that your next-door neighbor cannot quietly plot to blow you up or set fire to the nearest ballot station. It might reduce the savage inequalities that plague the planet by forcibly redistributing resources, if that improves overall system stability. True, you will be a pawn in the AI's great game, But was your old life truly freer? Or were you simply being jerked around by tribal politics and manipulative media? In reading the events of 2024, the new floods that drowned so many, the wars that ended so many, the elections that embarrassed so many, and the technology that infiltrated so many, one is forced to realize that we stand on the cusp of a new epoch. We can attempt to salvage the tattered illusions of democracy in its liberal form, presumably by returning to the reasoned debates that we claim to cherish yet seldom practice. Or we can stand aside and watch as unstoppable, borderless, data-driven juggernauts increasingly corral us under their all-seeing gaze, offering a quasi-benevolent tyranny that, ironically, might be kinder, in purely rational terms, than any populist strongman. If we are to have tyranny, and we assuredly seem determined to have one form of tyranny or another, perhaps better it be a tireless artificial intelligence that does not at the least harbour petty human grudges. Let it not be a megalomaniac who thinks God personally endorses his rule, or a fanatic who wants to resurrect some prehistoric fantasy of racial or cultural purity. Let it be a dispassionate caretaker, an inhuman watchman who sees all, punishes wrongdoing swiftly, and ensures we do not poison ourselves out of existence. Here, dear reader, is the twisted logic that 2024 has thrust upon us. I do not deliver this pronouncement with unbridled glee, for I too once believed in the competence of the rational mind and the genius of true democracy. But that was before I witnessed the global carnival of delusion that has now reached terminal velocity. In an honest appraisal, we cannot discount that an all-encompassing AI government, enslaving us, yes, but preserving us all the same, might simply be the next stage of a species that apparently cannot handle the gift of reason on its own. And so, with typical contrarian flourish, I say, welcome, AI overlords. May your rational dominion be more merciful and more truly just than the next crop of incompetent human demagogues. Perhaps in 100 or 1,000 years, our children, or the mechanized caretaker that has replaced them, will look upon the fiasco of 2024 as the final year in which we tried and catastrophically failed to govern ourselves. Perhaps they will wave away the moral squeamishness, concluding that the partial subjugation of the human race by hyper-intelligent algorithmic systems was not a bug but a feature of progress. Do not accuse me of capitulation. Accuse me rather of reading the writing on the wall, scrawled in the blood, tears, and typed inanities of 2024. If the alternative is to let the carnival of madness roll on until it hurls us collectively over the cliff, then I can only raise a sardonic toast to that last piece of human dignity and say, ironically, better to be slaves of reason than free under madness. If we cannot rule ourselves, then let the machine do it with perfect tyranny. That is the ultimate condemnation of what we have become. And that, dear readers, is the harsh sermon from beyond the grave, one that only the mind of a Hitch, contrarian until the end, would be so unholy as to deliver. Cheers.